Welcome to the LowCarbUSA podcast, where we seek to inspire you to help us build this community. I'm Doug Reynolds.
And this is Pam Devine.
Hi, everyone. So I've got Dr. Chris Knobbe with me today, and his big thing is seed oils. And there's a little bit of controversy about whether or not they're bad. I think in our community, we all believe that they are bad, but quite how bad, I think some of us are not fully aware of. So welcome, Chris. And why don't you just start off and start telling us why this is such a bad thing, these seed oils are such a bad thing, and then maybe we can have a bit of a discussion down the road.
Sure, Doug. So first of all, thanks for having me on your podcast. It's a pleasure. And so yeah, right to the point. Why are seed oils bad? Because essentially these oils are not part of nature. They're a product of the Industrial Revolution. They cannot be produced without some kind of factory, essentially. For the most part, or at least they never have been in any kind of significant volume. And seed oils, which is really a component of the vegetable oils, are very high in omega-6 linoleic acid, which is the primary omega-6 fatty acid that you'll find in any kind of fat. It accounts for about 90% of the omega-6 that would be in any kind of diet. And these omega-6 fats, like linoleic acid, they accumulate in our body. They accumulate in our body fat, in our cell membranes, and in our mitochondrial membranes. And they set up a biological milieu that is ripe to be pro-oxidative, pro-inflammatory, toxic, and nutrient deficient. And I call those the four pillars of hazard. And so with that, Doug, what we've witnessed, what we've observed is that since, for example, in the United States, since the 19th century, we've observed exponential increases in obesity, in coronary heart disease, in cancers, type 2 diabetes, well, really all diabetes, metabolic syndrome, Alzheimer's disease, dementia, age-related macular degeneration, and all the autoimmune diseases. And so there's a very strong parallel between vegetable oil consumption in really any country that I know of, and in most all of these chronic diseases where we have good data, where we have data that we can, rely on and track.
I know that you in some of your talks and that you talk about certain. Let's go back. You talk a lot about where you feel that these seed oils are the main cause of a lot of these chronic conditions. But within our community, we kind of feel like seed oils are maybe bad and you shouldn't eat them anyway, but they're not the primary driver behind these chronic behind these chronic conditions. So where do you really stand on that? I mean, I know that we just by cutting out all the fast food and all the carbohydrates and sugar and all of that kind of stuff, and you get thousands of people reversing their type 2 diabetes. But there is an argument that I've heard that says, well, yes, but if you cut all of that stuff out, you're cutting out, especially if all the processed foods and stuff, you're cutting out all the seed oils, and for the most part. And so is it actually the carbohydrates or the seed oils? That's kind of the argument that I've heard. And, I have my own opinion on that, but I'd like to hear what your thoughts are.
Sure. So Well, first of all, for the last 7 years, even publicly, I've been stating that I believe that the primary drivers of all of obesity and all of this chronic disease is, at the 50,000 foot view, it's processed foods. And processed foods are really, to me, there are four things. They're refined flours, refined added sugars, vegetable oils, the polyunsaturated vegetable oils or seed oils specifically, specifically anyway, and trans fats. So that's what processed foods are essentially made of, besides the so-called, mystery ingredients, the engineered ingredients that these, food engineers design. But that's how you can really track processed food. So that's the big drive. You get those out, and I think you're probably 95, 98, 99% of the way towards eliminating chronic disease in general. And so then, the question is, well, of the big three things that are left, which is, sugars, refined flours, and vegetable oils, which one of those are so problematic? And because I'm a data guy and I look at data, as you know, Doug, and I look at the evidence of all these chronic diseases versus the consumption of those components, you really can't track refined flours very well. But of the, if you look at vegetable oils and sugars, you'll see, for example, that we have marked increases in chronic diseases. For example, while vegetable oils are, well, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Marked increases in chronic diseases while sugars are going down, carbohydrates are going down, and even total calories are going down in some nations. But the one thing that is going up is the vegetable oils. And for example, that occurs in various proportions in the United States, in Australia, in the United Kingdom, Israel, and Japan, for example. All of those, we see some degree, or all of those together, decline, total calories, carbohydrates, and sugar declining, while we have obesity and diabetes and metabolic syndrome and even cancers going through the roof. But the one thing that keeps, seems to keep going up almost everywhere is the highly polyunsaturated vegetable oils. So, on a global basis, we just see that the world keeps supplanting and replacing healthy animal fats and even healthy, some plant fats that are natural, but anyway, with vegetable oils. And this, to me, is the reason for the disastrous health effects that we're seeing. Whether you look at populations at the state or country or global level, it all seems to track together with vegetable oils. With the highly polyunsaturated vegetable oils, let me just name those, Doug, real quick for those who are curious. So I would say that the worst of the worst are soybean, canola, cottonseed, rapeseed, grapeseed, sunflower, safflower, and rice bran. That's the worst of the worst. I would not recommend, specifically, I don't think that, it would be good to recommend peanut oil or sesame oil. And then, we could get into the weeds about the other oils, the tropical oils and fruit oils, if you want to. But that was my list, where if you eliminate those, I think you have, most people are going to have tremendous improvement in their health.
Yeah, and you talked about a little earlier about a couple of other vegetable oils. If we, like olive oil is one of the things that's considered really good within our ketogenic diet space. Again, not if you start cooking with it, because then it starts oxidizing and all bets are off. But at least in its cold pressed state, it seemed to be healthy. So what is the difference, say, between a cold pressed olive oil and canola oil, for instance? What if you had to analyze
Yeah.
it? What differences would you see?
Yeah, great point. Because the seed oils, all those ones that I said were the worst of the worst, they range from about 20% omega-6 linoleic acid, like you'd find in canola oil, up to about 78% omega-6 linoleic acid, like you'd find in safflower oil. And soybean oil falls in there at about 54 to 56%. And, if you contrast that, Doug, to the the healthy animal fats, traditionally raised animals, and that's critical to understand that, but traditionally raised animals that are not corn and soy fed would have an omega-6 linoleic acid in their body fat, or in their their total body fat would be around 2 to 2.5% typically. So again, contrast that to an average consumption or presence of omega-6 linoleic acid of around 38 or 40% in the seed oils.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so now let's look. If you look at olive oil, I've seen one study where they looked at 800 different kinds of olive oil, and the omega-6 linoleic acid ranged from about 3% up to 27%, I believe it was, with an average or a mean of about 10%. All right, so you've got 10% omega-6 linoleic acid in olive oil, let's say, on average. Well, it's still, it's not as good as the healthier animal fats, in my view. It definitely is tremendously better than the seed oils. And one of the saving graces, and maybe a very beneficial characteristic of olive oil, is the fact that it has so many antioxidants. It's very high in vitamin E. And so even though it's higher in omega-6 linoleic acid, I think those antioxidants and vitamin E, they make that a very healthy oil when it's pure, authentic, and it's fresh. And those are the issues, since we're on the subject, is that 79% of the so-called olive oil, even extra virgin olive oil in the United States, is not good quality, authentic olive oil. It's either adulterated or it cannot meet the quality standards set forth by the North American Olive Oil Association. So meaning that even if it was true, authentic olive oil and pure extra virgin olive oil, that maybe it's outdated, it's not properly packaged, contained, the container is not dark, it's not kept cool, it's 6 months old, all those kind of things. It will, just as you said, will make the olive oil oxidize, and therefore you're consuming advanced lipid oxidation end products, which are the same thing, that become very high in these seed oils. So that's basically the take on, the seed oils versus olive oil.
Yeah. The macadamia oil is another one that I know when we first started out on this journey was something that we used to get and use a lot. And avocado oil as well is also a vegetable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the thing with that is it's got a really high smoke point. So in terms of cooking, at least you can cook with that and not have it actually break down and become oxidized and become dangerous effectively for us to consume. So I suppose if somebody really does only want to use vegetable oils and you want to cook with it, then avocado oil might be an option for them, because there are some people that still have reasons, whether they're ethical or religious or whatever, that they don't want to eat animal products. And we try not to alienate anybody,
Right, I agree.
within our community. So try to find things that they can use outside of the animal products that that's not going to be dangerous for them or bad for their health. So I feel like that's avocado oil seems to be the best option that I know about for that option.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good option too. The omega-6 linoleic acid in avocado oil is about 14%. The biggest problem I again would see with avocado oil is, just like olive oil, it is now being adulterated commonly in the United States, and which probably means many of the Western countries are getting adulterated avocado oil, meaning they're putting cheap oils like canola or soybean oil in the avocado oil in order to increase their profits. Something that's been done began in the United States in the 1870s, the adulteration of olive oil, which we were already sending to Europe, and the French made complaint in 1880 that they were getting a bad so-called olive oil coming from the U.S. And so yeah, it's been going on forever. So that would be the main problem. But I would say an excellent oil to cook in that will tolerate high heat. It's 2% omega-6 linoleic acid is coconut oil.
Oh, okay.
And that would be a really, and you know, coconut oil has a fabulous track record of success in the Pacific Islands, for example. Many of those Pacific Islanders traditionally used coconut oil, and they had fantastic health. And then we started telling them they need to, you know, consume our hard healthy vegetable oils like canola oil and soybean oil. And now the Pacific Islanders, like, you know, the Tokelauans would be a perfect example. They think that they should be consuming soybean or canola, that these are the good oils. Meanwhile, they've now developed the highest obesity of any nations in the world. I think they hold the top 4 or 5 positions. Wow. The Pacific Island nations. And again, these were some of the most phenomenally healthy people on the planet 100 years ago.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Disastrous, just disastrous to their health. And we did it. America and Europe combined, you know, convinced them that these are the good, hard healthy oils. But, you know, that big message comes out of the United States. Mm. I think it's where it originates.
Yeah. So you talked about being a big data guy, and I know you've got tons of data that you've analyzed, and, you know, with regards to all of this. But at least, not that I'm aware of anyway, that there's not a lot of people in this community, whenever you start talking about it, they say, where's the evidence? And when they talk about evidence, they're talking about randomized controlled trials. Mm-hmm. And even with those, every time somebody brings that up, almost always when you look at it, it's really, really difficult to do a good unbiased randomized control trial, because with anything with diet related, it's long term. It manifests itself over 30 years. It's not, so how do you run a trial with a decent number of people for 30 years and make sure that they eat exactly what they do and eliminate this, you know, I feel it's the same with this. I've heard it happened with a diet doctor a bit, actually. Brett Scher was involved, and I know Adele Height was another one who came out and said, there's no evidence that seed oils are bad for you. And and when I quizzed them on that, it was like, well, when they say evidence, they're talking about randomized control trials. And until there's a randomized control trial that shows this, then we can't say there's evidence for this.
Well, you know what I would say to that person, first of all, Doug, anybody that would say that to me, the first thing I would ask them is do you believe smoking causes lung cancer? And if they said yes, I would say, do we have a randomized controlled clinical trial? Right. Did we randomize 1,000, 14-year-old children to smoke and another 1,000 14-year-olds not to smoke and then follow them for 50 years? Absolutely, we did not, right? We know this from observational epidemiologic evidence, and you could do the exact same thing, with various food products, which is what I do. Because, so for example, with lung cancer, they showed that over approximately a 50-year period, this is how they confirmed that smoking is bad, is that over a 50-year period that the people who were smoking had an increased risk of lung cancer that was 15 to 30-fold higher than the people who did not smoke, right? 15 to 30-fold. But, for example, tracking with obesity in the United States, we've seen since the 19th century a 35-fold increase in obesity. From 1900 to 2018, we've seen an increase in diabetes between 1890 and 2016 of 4,643-fold. So that's a period of 126 years, right? We've seen thousands of fold increases in age-related macular degeneration. We've seen really just infinite increases in Alzheimer's and in dementia and in coronary heart disease. Coronary heart disease was an extreme medical rarity in the 19th century worldwide, right? So the problem with the issue of waiting to or believing that we're going to have randomized controlled clinical trials with diets is in a way they're right. If they say, where's the evidence? I need to see a randomized controlled clinical trial in people. First of all, I think that those are the people that, well, they're never going to get their answers because they'll never be done. Right. So far, the longest trials I've ever seen, Doug, in any studies that were completely controlled diets were about 6 months. And they're very small numbers of people because they have to put them into a metabolic ward in a hospital. Yeah, they're prisoners of the hospital, essentially. They can't leave because if they leave, they could go to McDonald's and have a hamburger and French fries and a Coke and an apple pie, and then your study is screwed. And so they're prisoners of the ward. It's phenomenally expensive because they're like patients, and the metabolic ward is phenomenal. The metabolic kitchen, is very, very, very expensive to run, to track all that food, measure it, and understand the nutrients. Very, very complicated and extraordinarily expensive. Nobody's going to sign up for this for longer than maybe a few weeks or months. And that's the way it's always been. And most of the chronic diseases like coronary heart disease, strokes, many of the middle-age cancers, Alzheimer's, dementia, age-related macular degeneration, Parkinson's, the list goes on and on, autoimmune diseases. Most of these things take decades to develop. And so just as you said, if people want to answer this, we need a randomized controlled clinical trial where we completely control the diets. We put people into metabolic wards. We make half of them eat our processed foods or however we want to arrange it. The other half, put them on an ancestral diet with no seed oils, no sugar, however we want to arrange that, and then follow them, like you said, really for 40, 50 years, what I say, because you're not going to get answers about coronary heart disease for decades. I mean, really good, solid answers. The longest trial ever done with this, where they tried to accomplish this, in my view, and had some evidence, was the LA American Veterans Trial, and those researchers themselves said the trial needs to be much longer, and they didn't control diets very well at all. No. And people were coming in and out of the trial because they're trying to use people that are hospitalized, and how long are people going to be in a hospital? So people, that's typical of these studies. You have subjects coming in and out as the study progresses.
One of the arguments, a different argument I've heard against this idea that it has to be a randomized control trial is like parachuting. It's like, do we need to do a randomized control trial to prove that jumping out of an airplane without a parachute is bad for your health?
You have to, Doug, or you cannot figure out. These are people that think that, well, if you don't know if being run over by a Mack truck is dangerous, because we haven't done a randomized controlled clinical trial.
Yeah, exactly.
And here, the thing, even in medicine, I think it's something like I forget the number, but it's roughly 80% or more of medicine, of the decisions we make in allopathic conventional medicine are not made based on randomized controlled clinical trials. And I think that the people that are believing this, we've been so swayed by big pharma, because big pharma has really instituted these trials to try to prove that their drugs work, and the drugs don't work very well generally, and so they have trials that take years, and where little tiny differences they try to eke out little tiny evidence that the drug is better than placebo, for example. And because we have been taught that we need these RCCTs in order to draw conclusions, this has become the so-called gold standard. But if you look at Weston A. Price's research from the 1930s, which virtually everybody I know personally, all believe the evidence he gathered was extraordinary. None of it was based on randomized controlled trials. It's based on evidence where populations were either consuming their native traditional diet, and or they had transitioned over to a westernized diet of some type for some period of time, right? And that's really what I do, is I try to look at whole populations and look at the evidence, because we can go back, like in the United States, we can go clear back to evidence in the mid-19th century of food consumption versus all this chronic disease, or even obesity and chronic disease, which some would argue is a disease itself. But yeah, you could look at all of that evidence in totality, and that's what I think is by far and away the most valuable.
Yeah, so maybe something I'd like to explore with you a little bit is what your thoughts are on adaptation when exposed to a particular thing for a long time. And what brings me to ask that question was listening to a talk you did back in Denver just before COVID hit. One of the things that you cited was this community, I forget where, this maybe a South Pacific island or something, where 99% of their diet was sweet potatoes. And my thought is, okay, so that's all they've been exposed to for thousands of years, and so their metabolisms have adjusted so that because you were saying that they've got basically no chronic diseases, in spite of eating sweet potatoes, pretty much. I feel like if we had to put them in a lab somewhere and do some tests on them, their metabolism, I feel like their metabolisms have to be different. Because if you took me to that island, I would die in 6 months. I would literally there's no way I would survive. I'd get so sick, it would be terrible. But, if it's 15 generations of my ancestors had lived there and evolved there, and I was then born into that environment, it would be different. I wouldn't die.
Well,
what are you thinking about that? Because those are the kinds of, the minute you mention stuff like that, that's exactly what people are going to say. It's like, well, yeah, but that's all they've ever been exposed to. So is that a valid point, or is it not?
Well, I guess I have to say that I couldn't prove one way or another, and I guess nobody else could either.
Right.
That was the Papua New Guineans of Tukasinta. They're Highlanders. They live at like 7,000 to 9,000 feet, and they can't get to the ocean really to get seafood, and so they just grow sweet potatoes, and more than 90% of their diet is coming from sweet potatoes, and their diet is 94.6% carbohydrate, 3% fat, and 2.6% protein. They would rarely eat pork and chicken, so they weren't vegans, but they didn't have any obesity, any diabetes, any appreciable coronary heart disease. They're very, very healthy. They're definitely not in perfect health though. They had a very significant level of arthritis, and they had terrible tooth decay, which I think is because their animal food consumption is so low. They're not getting enough fat soluble vitamins. You have to have enough, meat or animal products, I should say. That could be meat, eggs, fish, dairy, the milk, dairy, those kinds of things, in order to get the fat soluble vitamins A, D, and K2. And they just really didn't have enough of those. But despite being on a diet that's almost exclusively sweet potatoes, and they smoke like crazy, and they live in smoke-filled huts, their health in comparison to Americans is tremendously better. And so I just use all of these examples, because I learn from them. I think we can all learn from them. And, Doug, they're really not that drastically different than the traditional Okinawans, whose diet was around, it's 84% carbohydrate and is coming almost all from sweet potatoes. So the Okinawans, their diet traditionally, it was pork, was small amounts of pork, sweet potatoes, and vegetables, and that's it. And they had no oils at all traditionally, and everybody knows they were phenomenally healthy. And they're losing that as they've westernized their diet since the 1850s, really since American occupation after World War II. They started westernizing their diet, and then the seed oils came in, and after 1950, and their seed oils, like in Japan proper, increased from 9 grams per person per day on average in 1961 up to 39 grams per person per day by 2004, I believe it was. So that's a 4.5-fold increase. And with that, like in mainland Japan, obesity in men doubled during that period. Breast cancer in women increased 5-fold. Diabetes between 1954 and 2007, I believe it was, increased 345-fold. What else? Their macular degeneration increased from 0.2% in the late 1970s to, what was it? I'm thinking here. Let's see. 16.37%, I believe it was, in 2013. That's an 82-fold increase. But their omega-6 consumption increased from 1% in 1961 to 7.8% by 2009. That's it. And this is why I always draw it back to what is the omega-6 as a percentage of the diet. And you never will get that high without seed oils or, and definitely the CAFO raised animals, the chicken and pork, at least, those will raise your omega-6, and so can nuts and seeds. But traditional diets, they're all under about 2% omega-6 linoleic acid. And all the Westernized diets are now somewhere in the 6 to 12% omega-6 linoleic acid range. Yeah.
And so this is the reason, and the reason that I brought you on here, and it's a little bit of a precursor to our event coming up in August, in a few weeks, in fact, a couple of weeks now, where I've invited you to come and speak there as well. And I know there are naysayers, and there's people that are going to get all uptight and whatever. And I'm hoping that people come with an open mind. And what I want, I mentioned this to you before off air, what I want to cultivate is a discussion. I want to walk around the evening after your talk. I want to walk around the patio where we've got all the dinner set up. And I want to listen to the conversations going on around those tables. And I want to hear people debating this. You know,
Yeah.
you don't have to agree with any of it. Or you can start out not agreeing with any of it and maybe come to believe some of it. I think that's kind of where I started out, and I've you know, I'm in the middle now, and I learn more all the time. And I you know, this thing about Symposium for Metabolic Health is not about the ketogenic diet only. I mean, that's a massive part of it, but there are so many other things that can affect our health. And like, you know,
and I would say, Doug, echoing that, is that the work that I do applies to all diets, everyone. And I want to speak to, I'm speaking to the carnivores who are absolutely, essentially, quote, zero carb, to low carbers, keto people, to the all the way to the vegans, right? That consume absolutely no animal products at all, because whatever, you know, whether your diet is carnivore or vegan or anywhere in between, the one rule I think that is so powerful is that the healthiest diets eliminate vegetable oils, eliminate the highly polyunsaturated vegetable oils, the seed oils. And so from that knowledge, I think it's helpful to anyone, no matter what your position is. So I try to speak to and include and work with all people who have all sorts of belief systems about diets, and everybody does. We've all got a diet. We've all got a belief system.
We've all got a very strong belief system as well.
Right. Yeah, we do.
Why the discussions are often quite animated, but that's, as long as people stay civil, I think debate and disagreement is good. That leads to discussions, and hopefully we all learn from those discussions. So
I tell you, I'm learning from carnivores, and I'm learning from vegans, and I continue to learn. And if I ever stop, I better get out of this field, because I need to. I've been educating myself since 2011, so 12 years I've been at this, or more than 12 years, and I've learned so much in the last 2 months. There's just so much to know. And so I try to be completely open-minded, and I try to field any questions and work with all kinds of belief systems. And I'm learning, like I said, I'm learning from carnivores and vegans both. It helps. You gather evidence everywhere you go if you're open-minded.
Totally. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to meeting you in person again for in a few weeks' time. And I look forward to the conversations that come out of your talk, because that science exists because of debate and discussion, and we can't just pigeonhole ourselves and just believe that what we think is true to be totally true without ever being prepared to explore outside of the box. So
right.
Thanks for joining me. And like I said, I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you, Doug. I appreciate it very much.
Cheers.
Cheers.
You've been listening to an episode of the LowCarbUSA podcast. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/LowCarbUSA.